Hello and welcome to Campus Conversations. I'm Joe Marinello, lecturer and academic advisor for the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at UNC Charlotte. Today we'll be talking about domestic violence. It is a serious and a searing issue. Personally, this issue hits home in two significant ways. I have 6 daughters, of whom one was in an abusive relationship. She ended the relationship before sustaining physical abuse. When I was a reserve deputy for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in the early 1970s, I was called to the scene of a family dispute which ended in a homicide. This is before the issue of intimate partner violence was even referred to as domestic violence. These two situations created a springboard into my becoming an anti-violence educator for the past 22 years. I refer to domestic violence in many of my remarks as a social cancer. It is an issue of great concern. We all have a responsibility to tackle it. Trying to help victims of domestic violence and trying to prevent perpetrators of domestic violence is a tough, hard, harrowing job. All those who are engaged in this work deserve the thanks, appreciation, and respect from society all across our counties, state, and country. For women to be killed every week in this country by domestic violence by their partners or ex-partners may be a statistic that is widely known, but just because we may be familiar with it should not prevent us from still being shocked. We should never forget that it is an appalling, a despicable, disgusting statistic. Those who carry out these outrageous acts are, of course, primarily to blame, but this is, too, a statistic which shames us all. It is becoming increasingly accepted that violence within the family is no longer a purely domestic issue. It is a problem which belongs to society as a whole, and which should properly be the subject of debate and cooperation between health, policy, and legal professionals. And I am therefore pleased to have such a breadth of representation in the studio with me. We have with us Elizabeth Trosch, District Court Judge, Mecklenburg County; Amanda Wilson, Co-Director of United Family Services Victim Service Unit; Officer Maurice McDonald from CMPD's finest; and we also have Mr. Donavan Grant, who will be with us during the next segment to talk about batterer intervention. I think the best way to try to discuss this topic would be to define domestic violence. In your opinion, and I'd like all of you to share your perception, what is domestic violence?
Well, when I'm sitting in court and hearing cases involving allegations of domestic violence where someone is seeking a domestic violence protective order, I have to define domestic violence as it's defined in the law. And in the law, domestic violence is defined very specifically, and that is to determine what circumstances of domestic violence are appropriate to warrant an order of protection, which obviously results in limiting the conduct of another person, and can also result in the exclusion of an alleged batterer from their home. So, but in my general understanding of domestic violence, I know, and all of our judges who preside in courtrooms dealing with domestic violence cases are aware that domestic violence is much broader than the narrow legal definition.
I think many people think that it's always a physical act that would cause a perpetrator to come before you. Is that true?
No. And particularly in the circumstances of seeking a domestic violence protective order, our law not only covers the infliction of physical injury, but also the attempt to inflict physical injury, placing someone in fear of imminent serious bodily harm. The law also includes essentially harassment. Harassment that rises to the level of placing someone causing someone substantial emotional distress. So domestic violence, even in the law, does not only mean physically hurting somebody. It means creating a situation that that causes harm, emotional or physical, between people who have what we call a protected relationship or special relationship.
So it's about power and control and intimidation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, the law tries to deal with that broader definition of domestic violence by determining what situations of power and control and intimidation should rise to the level of getting a protective order.
Amanda, you work with hundreds of victims of domestic violence. So from your perspective, how would you define it, since you end up with the tragedies and the victims as a result of this perpetration?
Well, as Judge Trosch said, domestic violence is the use of power to obtain control over an intimate partner, in its very simplest definition. The law does recognize the physical violence as well as the emotional fear that a victim gets placed into. But as advocates, we also have to work with the other forms of control that a perpetrator uses, which includes financial control, using the children or family members as weapons of control, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, all the different ways that a perpetrator controls their victim before they ever throw the first punch.
Officer McDonald, last year there were 30,000, actually more than 30,000 domestic violence calls, 911 calls. And for the officers to respond to these calls, what is it that they're really looking for when they enter these premises and are looking for the signs of domestic abuse occurring?
Well, first of all, the domestic violence call is one of the more serious calls and more dangerous calls that any police officer anywhere in the world can respond to, because you never know what you're facing. Even if you've been to that house before, this time it could be totally different. And you're dealing with a lot of emotions, you're dealing with people under stress, you're dealing with violence. But as the officer goes there, officer safety is paramount to make sure, and then of course to assess the situation, what's going on, who called, be aware of the surroundings, looking at the furniture, see if there's signs of some physical violence, and of course looking at the victims or the person who called, if there are signs of bruises they may have, or scratches, or blood, or children crying. Just really an array of things that the officer has to be alert to, and listening to what the person is telling you, and sometimes what they're not telling you. And ideal to help the victim in this situation, assess if there are charges to be filed, who goes to jail, who will not go to jail, or who's taking the report, those type things. So it's the beginning process to getting into the court system. Sometimes also looking for medical assistance. You know, if the person needs medical attention, or children, contacting DSS. So there's a lot of things that go on in a domestic violence call for a police officer.
In the calls that you've handled personally, is there any one call that may stand out in your mind where either the perpetrator or the victim had to be hospitalized, or was an arrest made, and how did you handle that?
I say a lot of times when you make the arrest, for me, it's really difficult when children there and you have to arrest a parent in front of a child, and the issues that they go through, trying to make it easier for them. And I think for me, just the calls, those type calls, will make it very, very difficult, because sometimes they see the police as the enemy at that moment. The next time you come, or they'll say things like, "Oh, you know, you're arresting my daddy," and even though this is for his safety, they're arresting my mom. And so for me, they're kind of difficult for me.
Since most of the perpetration of domestic violence that comes through our court system is mostly men, I know that we can acknowledge that some women perpetrate violence in the home, but why do you feel that so many men perpetrate domestic violence? What is it about men that they feel justified in abusing their partners?
Well, we know historically that in patriarchal societies, the use of power and control by men was used to keep what was then referred to as social order. Today, we find that it is continued through our generations, not just as it's passed from one parent to their child in terms of the behaviors they learn, but also it's in our culture. It's in our music, it's on our TVs, it's everywhere we go. It's in our language. The rule of thumb that is a saying that a lot of people use is actually English common law that says that you could beat your wife with something as long as it wasn't bigger than your thumb. So it permeates every part of our culture. And so until we address those issues, it's going to stay with us, unfortunately.
I know that that rule of thumb law, if I'm not mistaken, North Carolina was one of the first states to repeal that law to some degree. And I think that what most people don't understand is that domestic violence has been going on for 2,000 years. This isn't something new, but I think during the women's movement back in the 60s, you know, when women started to say, you know, I don't have to put up with this anymore, they came out of the closet, so to speak, and this secret that was going on inside the home now became public. And it should have been. And I think that's one of the things that many of our audience probably don't understand is how pervasive this is and how often it occurs. And as Officer McDonald can attest to, it traumatizes children. What are the biggest myths or misconceptions you hear about the different kinds of abuse that occur with victims of domestic abuse?
I think one of the myths is that if I don't touch my partner, if I didn't hit her, then I didn't do anything. And many times the perpetrators will say, well, I didn't hit her. I didn't do anything, so how can I be arrested for this? Or she caused me to do this.
So actually communicating a threat.
Very much so.
Where the victim feels that her safety is being compromised, that could also be, that could be a legitimate arrest.
It can both support a charge of the crime of communicating threat, and it may also be the basis for entry of a domestic violence protective order.
We hear every day about people being murdered. Just this week, a perpetrator killed his partner in front of their children. There was a silent march yesterday for that person. Is there anything that the public can do when they're aware of domestic violence occurring?
Well, one of the big things that the community can do is to speak out against domestic violence. 1 in 4 women will be a victim of domestic violence in their lifetime. And to give you a little perspective, 1 in 8 women will be a victim of breast cancer. But we find that both breast cancer and domestic violence celebrate the same awareness month. However, breast cancer survivors are in marches wearing their pink hats, while the domestic violence survivors are sneaking in back doors because there's still such public shame for the crime itself. Second only to sexual assault, it's the most underreported crime in our society. So we still aren't supporting these women as they try to seek safe homes.
Thank you. I want to thank Officer McDonald right now for being here this morning and giving us his perspective. And during our next segment, we'll have Mr. Donavan Grant come out and talk about batterer intervention and what batterers can do to change their behavior. Thank you, Officer McDonald.
You're welcome.
have Mr. Donavan Grant with us this segment. Donavan, thank you so much for being here with us today to discuss this issue. Earlier, we were speaking about the myths and misconceptions about domestic abuse, and also we were discussing about protective orders. And I would like to go back to that right now because there are certain myths about victims. And I know, Amanda, you work with these folks, and talk about that a little bit.
Well, one of the myths is that a victim of domestic violence is a poor individual who lacks education and oftentimes is of a minority group. What we find is that the only demographic that makes you more likely than not to be a victim of domestic violence is that you're female. Domestic violence knows no race, income level, geographic region, nationality. It happens to all women in our society, and it is something that we must deal with from all different levels. The #1 age group for those to be victimized is the teen to early college years, the 18 to 26-year-olds who are just entering the dating relationship part of their adulthood, and that makes them vulnerable to this type of crime.
So this education that we're hopefully providing this morning is really good for college students to understand also.
Absolutely. Domestic violence is an epidemic that happens on college campuses nationwide.
Donavan, what about the batterers? Is there any myths about them? Is there any profile for them? I mean, how do we know? I mean, can we see a batterer?
Well,
when he walks down the street?
Well, just like with the victim, you can't pick a batterer or a victim out of a crowd because, as Amanda was saying, it knows no socioeconomic boundaries. It's everybody from all walks of life. So, no, you can't. And somebody you could know personally, but not realize what's going on in the home. So there's not a profile. Now, there are certain behaviors that when they come into the NOVA program, for instance, and we assess them, that we are looking for. Controlling behaviors that we alluded to earlier, and different types of abuse that they've committed. So, so there is a profile in that sense, but just knowing them, picking them out off the street, no, you wouldn't be able to recognize a batterer.
I think one thing that is important to think about is that domestic violence isn't something that just suddenly erupts in a relationship. It's something that it develops slowly and insidiously in a relationship, with things as simple as isolating the partner from family members, or making the couple become reclusive and isolating the partner from friends. Maybe not wanting your partner to go out alone with their girlfriends, but insisting that you accompany her wherever she goes. And there's other things like that that can start very slowly and go on for weeks, months, years before that usually woman recognizes the fact that she is essentially under the complete control of her partner and afraid to do anything that he would not expressly authorize or approve. And I think that it's important for people to understand that this isn't something that just suddenly erupts, or a certain kind of person who hits women, but this is a process in a relationship that develops over time that results in one person having power and the ability to control the behavior of another person who has also found themselves in a position of dependence, usually financial dependence, emotional dependence, on that person who has the power.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think commonly people do think of, when they hear domestic violence, they think of physical violence. And there's so many other forms of violence and forms of abuse to gain and maintain that power and control that's used before it ever gets physical. And some of the ones you talked about, the verbal abuse, the isolation, and asking her who she's talking to, where she's been, all those kind of controlling behaviors that many people do not perceive that as being domestic violence. So and he doesn't come on that way. He doesn't come on and slap her on the first date, because if he did, then
she wouldn't go on a second.
She wouldn't go on a second. So it comes on very charming.
It's stuff like starting with, you're so important, I can't live without you. You're the only person who knows me, and you're the only person I can trust. And kind of creating this island of the two people that slowly becomes more and more isolated from the family around them, the social network around them, and then the community around them. Which
as we move more into the technology age and social media becomes part of how we socialize with our friends and family, we have found that the use of cell phones, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as new GPS technology, have been used as powerful tools in the recent years to effect control over an individual. Especially
because a lot of times you might find that the person who is exercising power and control is checking the phone to see who's called, is cracking into email accounts, checking Facebook pages, and any misstep in the contact with the outside world can be very destructive.
The cycle of violence that's often referred to is a three-phase cycle. Is that not correct?
Correct.
From what I understand, there's a tension-building stage, and then it moves from there to a physical stage, where the perpetrator crosses the line, and then because of his remorse, now he wants to bring flowers or candy, and I guess they refer that to as the honeymoon stage. Does that cycle of violence just continue and continue with these perpetrators, or do they even skip part of that cycle?
Well, on average, it takes 6 to 7 times for a victim to completely leave a domestic violence situation, partly because of the cycle you just described. Typically after the first or second episode, the victim wants to believe that they can put their family back together, that help can be sought, and that changes can be made to where they can put back the dream they had about the relationship that they were in. And quite frankly, they're in love. They fell in love before things got bad. Typically after the second time and then third, fourth, and fifth time, you really are living out of fear. By that point, it isn't so much about the honeymoon phase, so much as it about, I'm afraid that if I leave, he'll kill me. As an advocate, the #1 threat I heard from clients was, he said, if I leave him, he'll kill me. So every time a victim leaves a domestic violence situation, she's calling his bluff, and we're all waiting to see if he'll follow through with it or not.
That's the most critical time, is when they decide to leave that relationship, which takes me to the question about protective orders, Judge Trosch. How enforceable are these protective orders, and do they work?
Well, actually, Amanda and I were having a conversation about that before we came in here, and she used an analogy that I particularly like, that a protective order is a piece of paper, and we frequently tell people that when they leave our courtrooms, that it is a piece of paper. It does provide you with some opportunities for protection. For example, excluding the batterer from the home, awarding custody temporarily to prevent the use of children as tools of power and control, and also to protect the children. And also, most importantly, there is a crime associated with violation of a domestic violence protective order. But in the end, you're leaving with a paper, much like a marriage license when you get married, or a birth certificate when a child is born. But it's an opportunity, and it depends, frankly, on sometimes the ability of the person who has it to use it effectively, and also on some of the response systems that we have built in to enforce it. Because the most immediate enforcement when a violation occurs is the assistance of law enforcement officers.
The most powerful protective order comes when not only has a victim obtained the domestic violence protective order, but they've also worked with a professional to develop a safety plan. And with that safety plan, they help the victim know how to use the protective order. Who do you call? How do you get help? Do we need to get your locks changed? Do we need to change your route to work? Do we need to put you in the shelter so that you have a safe place to stay? So the most powerful document really comes with the service and safety plan of the professionals in our community who are there to help.
And I think that, as the judges frequently will tell people when they leave with a protective order, you need to speak with the victim's advocate about other things that you may need to do to protect yourself. And fortunately, United Family Services has those advocates available in both the criminal and civil domestic violence courtrooms to assist with that. And ultimately, that's what we can do, is equip with the protective order, connect them with the professionals who can assist them in planning, and hope that they will use those resources to extricate themselves.
I'd like to direct my next question to Donavan. You run the largest batterer intervention program in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm not too sure what the numbers are, but I know they're very high. Does batterer intervention work? Can men actually change their behavior?
I believe yes. If I couldn't continue to do this if I didn't believe that. And I know what I see and what I've seen over the years doing these NOVA groups. And I always say that, you know, we get these guys kicking and screaming. They don't want to be here. They don't feel like they need to be here. They're in denial. I'm not abusive. I'm not violent. I don't have a problem. And then we can't get them to leave because once they are very real in these groups with other men, and they're talking, they're accountable for their actions, their violent behavior, which is key. They have to be accountable for that. But really kind of talking about and being honest with themselves about their behavior, what they've gone through, and connecting with some of those guys in the group who have gone through, have very similar paths. It's a safety net for them to really be honest and kind of come out from behind the macho kind of bravado that they demonstrate, that controlling. Usually when I see a guy who comes in very loud and abrasive, he's masking more. He's got more stuff that he needs to process through, and that's where it's kind of coming out, and it's a shield.
A lot of these men have low self-esteem, I think, to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one of the reasons why they become violent, in order to exercise that power over somebody. So
I wanted to just mention that I recently read of a study that has recently been published that found that men who enter batterer intervention programs and complete them are 50% less likely to commit acts of violence against an intimate partner again. And then similarly, a similar statistical significance was found for criminal interventions. Men who are prosecuted and convicted and placed on probation are similarly about 50% less likely to commit another act of violence. So I think that studies show that these types of interventions are effective.
Right, and I was going to say, you know, I can speak very anecdotally because of what I see, and I see their countenance changes, but because it does, they almost become unrecognizable, you know, when they really buy into the concepts that we're teaching them and want to maintain this lifestyle of nonviolence with their intimate partner. They almost look like a completely different person. So that's a cool thing to witness. But of course, as far as hard numbers go, and this is something that NOVA tracks, we do look at graduates who have, after they've graduated from the program for a year, what if they've been rearrested during that time for domestic violence. This past year, out of about 200 clients, we only had 11 reoffend, and that was statewide. So that shows us that our program is working pretty effectively.
I am so pleased that we have had this opportunity today to share some information about how pervasive this issue of domestic violence is, and I can't thank you all enough for being here with me to provide this. I also want to thank our audience who is viewing this program. We are passionate about stopping violence in the home, and I'm hoping that what you've seen today will provide you some information so that you will know where to get some help. Thank you.